Okay. Afternoon, members. Welcome to the Scrutiny Joint Committee. Agenda item 1, welcome apologies. Have we got any apologies, Geraint?
Thank you, Chair. We've got apologies from Councillors Brooks, Constance, Furzer, Mason, Seaborn, Taylor and Waite, and Co-opted Member Mel Tudball.
Thank you. Any other members? No of any?
Yes, Chair. Councillor Ron Burnett sends his apologies.
Any others? No. Okay, move on to agenda item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of June 2015. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I'm right. I'm ahead of myself this afternoon, right. Got any declarations of interest? If anybody's got any, would they like to write them in the attendance book? No declarations either? No. Okay, right, move now on to the minutes of the meeting held on 9th of June. They start on pages 5. So can we go through them for accuracy, please? Page 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9. Anybody happy to move the meeting? Yeah. Thank you, members. Agenda item 4, action sheet, which starts on pages 11 to 12. It's an update on actions decided at the last meeting. Everyone happy to note the action? Yes? Yes? Second? Yes? Thank you. Very quiet this afternoon. Okay, move on to agenda item 5, delivering the corporate plan to progress update on delivering the Council's 2014-15 improvement objectives. They start on pages 13 of the agenda. We've got Tom Roberts here to ask and answer any questions to see if it's robust and clear enough. Okay. Yeah. So, over to Tom.
I'll be exceptionally brief to give you an opportunity to answer as many questions as you would like, but just to highlight a couple of points. The annual performance report is a statutory document that we have to produce each year, and within that statutory document we are required to do an honest self-evaluation of our progress against the measures and activities that we said we were going to do in the previous year. This document is an opportunity for members to scrutinise that self-evaluation, but it's shaped by what you've told us in previous years. We've cut down the amount of information, we've given you the overall self-assessment, and then pulled out some of the issues as we see them that members may wish to look into a bit further. So, as I said, we have cut it down dramatically in size, but the document in its entirety is available for any member wishing to see it. That's pretty much all I'd like to say, and I'm here to answer any questions you have regarding the process of producing the self-evaluation, and if there's any questions regarding individual measures, then we've got the Chief Officers here who can answer those.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Okay, we're going to open it up to members then to ask any questions. Have we got any questions for? No? Right, in the scrutiny activity and the joint pre-planning, we discussed measures, and we wanted to know if the measures are weighted in any way before they're scored. We wanted to know who the audience for the Council's performance report in October was being pitched for correctly. So, can you just give us a quick overview on that?
Yeah, the short answer to the weighting question is no. There's no weighting being applied to any of the measures in producing the score. We've looked at how other councils have produced their self-assessments, and my own feeling is there's perhaps a bit of perception in the self-assessment, and what we've tried to do is something a bit more scientific, and conduct our self-assessment purely on are we hitting those numerical targets that we set ourselves at the start of the year. So it's a hard and fast yes or no. We could put weighting in against certain measures, as clearly, you know, some of the measures are more important than others. But what you would then find is your rationale for your self-assessment would get a lot more complicated. So we have tried to keep it as simple as possible, and that's why at the moment we've just got that hard and fast yes or no to help us do a simpler self-assessment as we can. Happy to listen to any sort of recommendations regarding changing that rationale, but we've gone for something which is simple and as objective as possible.
Any member, Councillor Rees?
Yeah. Just to come back to the format of this self-assessment, we're trying to make it easy for people to understand, I'm assuming. So, and I think that it has improved quite a lot. So, but who are we pitching this report to, really?
It is aimed at being a public-facing document. It is for members of public.
So,
however,
yeah.
It is audited by our external auditors every year, and they have their views on what the document should contain. So, you know, in order for us to tick those boxes, we do have to contain certain pieces of information.
Have we consulted with anybody on, for example, the People's Panel to find out whether they felt it was easily accessible?
We haven't.
Would you like to do that?
We could do that, yes.
Could that be a recommendation? Yeah. Any other members? Councillor Crick?
Thank you, Chair. We weren't clear when we were having a look at this the other day which of the measures were Welsh Government required and which were locally. Would it help to define that, given some of these were obviously measured against other councils as well, if you like, because they're similar. With others, they're not. They're very much local. And it's not clear from these. You know, even if you just put something like WG in parenthesis after a measure, it might be helpful.
We could denote that, yes.
Councillor Kemp?
Sorry, this is in relationship to the first paragraph on page 17, when we were talking about the improvement objectives. Is it the formula that you use to score Torvine's self-assessment the best approach? Is it the Welsh Government requirement, or if not, were other approaches considered?
Welsh Government don't actually sort of issue a requirement. You know, we are, as I said previously, required to undertake an honest self-evaluation, and that is what we've attempted to do. In the past, we've used the activities to feed into that self-assessment, but like I said, we've tried to do something based on our numerical performance measure targets, which you could either say we've hit them or we haven't hit them. And therefore, it's sort of my opinion, our opinion, that that's the most honest way of doing the self-assessment, rather than using the activities, which you could perhaps put a bit of, I don't know, subjectivity when you do your self-assessments, as far as whether you've actually achieved them or not.
In regarding the formula that was used, though, if like you said, that 2/3 have been fully successful, and obviously there was 1/3 partially successful. Is that a formula which is being used in the other authorities, or is it just with Torvines, if you like? Because I'm not sure if that formula could be improved.
I have looked across other local authorities in the Gwent region, and they use a variety of methods, but I think we're the only ones who are actually stipulating the formula in order to mark our self-assessment. Whether it's the right formula, I'm happy to consider whether we should change it, but we are actually stipulating there is a formula for us coming up with our self-assessment.
Has there been any research done in regarding what other authorities are doing to scrutinise, if like, their improvement objectives as such?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
Obviously, when we're looking at two-thirds for us is fully successful, and a third is partially successful. If like, has there been any research done in regarding what the other authorities are doing in regarding measuring their improvement objectives?
Like I said, I've gone through their documents, but I can't see that there's a formula. You know, I could contact each of the authors to see whether underneath there's something more rigorous which backs up their improvement reports, but I can't see on the face of it that there is a formula to produce their self-assessment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Parish.
Thank you, Chairman. I was going to bring up the two-thirds hitting targets, because it could be 66%, it could be 96%. We don't know unless we've got the figures, to back it up. It's such a wide spectrum, you know what I mean? I think it should be narrowed down a little bit. You know what I mean? Perhaps 25%, 50%, 75%. Make it 3 rather than 2. Do you know what I mean? Hitting targets at 66%, I don't think it's acceptable. Well, it isn't to me, I don't know about other members.
I mean, it's the formula we used last year, but, like I said, I'm happy to consider any recommendations with changing the formula.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rees.
I think you used the phrase whether we hit our targets or not. But in the document, there's a symbol which says performance in proximity of target. So would it be helpful if we knew exactly in percentage terms in what proximity that was? 2%, 5%, 10%, 50%?
I think it would be helpful, and we have used 2% as our cut-off point. Yeah, that's why I said I think it would be helpful.
Councillor Morby.
Same point, really. That calling something partially successful when its score is actually less than 50% seems to me to render us prone to some sort of criticism that actually we're calling something partially successful when it was more unsuccessful than successful. And so I think it would be useful, as Thomas indicated, to have a review of that. I think the benchmark of 50% at least to be partially successful would be a reasonable one, and I would have gone for 75% as the benchmark to be able to describe the performance as successful. But of course you need to have regard to any requirements of Welsh Government or Wales Audit Office, or indeed what other councils might be doing if they are Welsh Government type targets, which may be prone to comparison between authorities. So it's something I think where a bit more thought and research would be useful. And obviously it's not for us to determine this. This is a matter when, I suppose, when Council decides whether or not to agree the forward-facing plan or whichever report it comes under. But I think having a rationale which is more easily understood, because we didn't really understand it properly, would be helpful.
Thank you. Any other members? Comments? No? Questions? Okay, thank you. So we'll move on now to Appendix 2, the exception report, which is found on pages... What page is that on? 21. We've got Dermot McChrystal and Karen Padfield, the officers here, and Sue Evans as well. Welcome. Okay, in each of the set of measures, we've got some set questions. So once these have been answered, I'm going to invite members in then to ask supplementary questions on them. Okay, so first one is the raising standards of educational attainment. You did not meet your target for this measure. Can you answer us why? Dermot, do you want to come in on that?
Thank you, Chair. This target obviously relates to the number of looked after children who leave school without any approved external qualification. To contextualise this, that means in this year's cohort we've got 11 pupils. So one pupil we think will not leave with a recognised external qualification. Our target is always 0. This is a long-standing debate about can we always guarantee, or should we really set our target to guarantee that all pupils will come out with something, bearing in mind the complexity of the lives of some of these young people. We still always will persist in trying to make sure that every single young person comes out with something that we think, ethically that's the right thing to do. In this year, the same as last year. So even though the percentages are different, that's because the cohort size changes. So it was one pupil last year as well who left without anything. The young person this year, we think, won't come out with anything in terms of formal qualifications, is because they're beyond our reach in terms of how we can ensure they sit those examinations. And we're obviously working very closely with colleagues in social care and other agencies to try to support them, but we know that's unlikely to be possible. In fact, we know it's not possible. We will always strive to make sure there are no pupils who leave without. But we also have to accept that that's not always the case. And in this year, same as last year, that'll be one pupil.
So is there anything you can do you think, to going forward to improve the performance?
And one of the things that we've done with the consortium is the pupil deprivation grant that's targeted for looked after children. We've just agreed a new matrix for how that funding can be released to local authorities. We've got more improved tracking systems in place for schools to look at how we can make sure that resource, that additional resource, is well targeted. However, I would say that we already do, I believe, a good job. It's never good enough because obviously one young person leaving without qualifications isn't good enough. But generally we do a good job, so we'll continue to do that and make sure that the systems that we have in place we keep under active review, and we go the extra mile to make sure that our looked after children are well supported.
Okay, thank you, Dermot. Members, Councillor Rees.
Who, apart from the school, monitors the individual learning plans of the looked after children?
We have a nominated officer within the local authority, the Vulnerable Children's Officer, whose job it is to look at all personal education plans for children and young, for looked after children, and attends those reviews. So we've got a targeted resource that's been in place for a couple of years now, and we're looking to see if we can further extend that support this year too.
So as we have a targeted resource, and you've said we've improved our tracking, can we estimate how many children might be likely not to achieve a qualification in the next academic year?
For next academic year, I think it's too early for us to say that because we won't even know necessarily the whole cohort. We'll know those pupils who are currently looked after, some of whom may not be looked after next year. So that's always the danger about looking at this group in its very small numbers. What I would say is that we know those pupils who are currently in the looked after system very well. There are very well established plans in place for them, and we're working very closely with the other agencies.
Just it's a very small point, but it would help us if we put the number of children, not just the percentage, in the next, give us a better idea as well.
Councillor Moorby. Any other members? Any questions on number 1? No? Okay, we'll move on to number 2, ensure that learning for all children and young people is inclusive and accessible. So again, you did not meet the target. Oh, Karen, sorry. I don't know what you're saying. Okay, you didn't meet your target for this measure. Can you tell us why, Karen, please?
Thank you, Chair. The offer for schools, and members may be familiar or may not, there's a booklet that goes out to schools that has various different offers of alternative curriculum within it. In previous years, we have, through various grant funding means, been able to provide the offer free. This year, the offer wasn't free. There was a request for schools to contribute some funding, and for various reasons, I think different interventions being placed, lots of things happening in relation to schools having PGG grant to apply in certain Wales. Some of our schools are Schools Challenge Cymru schools, so there are various different interventions that are available and in place to provide perhaps some of the alternative curriculum. So I think it's a combination from the discussion that Youth Service have been having with schools. There are some combination of factors around whether something was freely available, whether something had to be funded in a particular way. So yes, the target wasn't hit, but there are some young people benefiting from it, and I'm sure through the school improvement and the school monitoring arrangements, the efficacy of those other interventions, I'm sure, is being monitored through the AES and our other systems. I think it's just there perhaps was more choice on offer in various different ways. We're working with schools for next year. There are some pupils continuing next year, and there are also potentially some young people that schools have put forward to think that they may want to benefit from this. That's roughly in the region of probably 50 to 60 at the moment. That will obviously be refined by schools when they come back in September, depending on the young people's needs. And there are 3 schools who have yet to have a discussion, well, they've had a discussion with the Youth Service, but they haven't indicated numbers so far. So we'll be reflecting on the numbers as identified by the schools, which they think will meet the young person's needs through this intervention, which, as I say, is one of several that schools get to choose from.
Okay, thank you. Members, do you want to come in? No, all quite happy? Okay, thank you, Karen. I think the next one's for you as well. Transform educational provision for young people aged 14 to 19. You did not meet these targets for the measures. Can you tell us why?
Okay, thank you, Chair. The first one, which refers to the Young Recruits programme. Young Recruits is a supported employment programme for young people. Part way through the programme, Welsh Government made a decision to cease the way that it operated. So there was a point at which we had to revise new targets because there were no new starts. So you'll notice that the numbers at some point went from 86 back down to 47. Those 47 were existing young people who were on the programme, who were being seen through their programme. Now, it's quite flexible, so you have to estimate when a young person is going to complete. What actually happened was 3 young people completed earlier than the final quarter you have reported on there. So the difference between the 47 and the 44 is 3 young people completed earlier, so were reported earlier.
Okay. Any members want to come in on number 3? No? All happy? Oh, Councillor David.
Yes, could we also have asking about the Lift Cody participants as well, please?
Yes, sorry, I didn't know if members wanted to ask on the first point first. Yes. In relation to Lift Cody and for members, I'm not sure if all members are aware of Lift Cody, its origin. It was a bid that we put to Regional Collaboration Fund across ourselves, Blaenau Gwent and Caerphilly. The numbers that are reported here relate to Torfaen. When we had the proposal put forward and the targets that were set, we had an assurance from Welsh Government that the money would be received for the beginning of the financial year. The money did not come until much later, so the project couldn't actually start until November. Consequently, in the first year, there just wasn't time to get through with young people that had been referred and were going to be taking some qualifications. So at the end of the first year, we met with Welsh Government. Welsh Government were very happy with the level of what had been achieved. Targets were revised for the second year, and I think the lesson we've learnt on that is that where you have a cumulative target from projects, that we perhaps need to think about how we present them in our funding system so that we can account for changes externally that affect that, because sometimes the timing doesn't particularly suit the way that they then get reported. So there are, if members want additional data on how that actually panned out, then I can give them. But just to say that Welsh Government was satisfied with the achievement. They gave us funding for year 2, which will be reported on, and the project is going forward to its completion, which will actually be the December of this year.
Thank you. Councillor Rees.
Yeah. So our provisional performance is about 50%. What was it for Blaenau Gwent and Caerphilly?
I'd have to look that up and get back to you.
Any other members? No? Okay, thank you, Karen and Dermot. As in the report, the first sections are short and they only relate to you. I'm quite happy. If you want to leave, you can be free. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll now move on to number 4. Ensure that children are safe. Sue Evans, you did not meet your target for this measure. Now, I don't know whether members want to go through each individual section, or should we ask you to give a brief overall of why each section wasn't met on the targets, and then members can ask specific questions then after. Is that okay? Yeah? Okay. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, Chair. So you want me to go through them and then see what members' questions emerge at the end, yes?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
On the first one, statutory visits, yes, you're right, we didn't meet our target there. And when we were at Q3, I was estimating we would probably achieve about 75%. And I think this is one of those areas where we're probably going to have to seriously think about reducing that target. The only way that target is going to be significantly increased is to have additional social workers, and that would require additional budget, that the council doesn't have. And the reason why that can't be improved upon without additional resources is the priority has to be for social workers to deal with the 26-week ruling in terms of court cases, preparation for care proceedings. And obviously you've got the same workforce trying to do all of the general assessments and statutory visits as are doing all the preparation work for courts. And we must meet those timescales. They are court-directed timescales. And unfortunately that means that statutory visits being completed within a certain timescale at the end of the year will suffer as a consequence. Demands into the service are still increasing, and although we're putting good arrangements in place for the longer term strategic approach to managing our demand by working with Families First, Sure Start and others to prevent people coming in, whilst we're still dealing with relatively high numbers, we've got the same workforce trying to deal with both those issues. But obviously we're monitoring it, and we'll benchmark where we are against others at the end of the year when those figures are available. But a realistic target is probably going to be nearer 80% rather than 95%, over the next couple of years, whilst the financial pressures and the means to appoint more social workers are not there. The families going through the Family Focus service, that's still a fairly new service. An independent evaluation has been done and has advised us that, yes, it's doing good things and it's using the right methodologies, motivational interviewing techniques and other things that are used by IFST teams. That's a national programme across Wales. But obviously what we're trying to do in its first years of development is trying to understand which of the families are best accommodated by this particular service. So some families will refuse help, and then if they do refuse help, we will have to potentially put the child on the Child Protection Register and go through the formal statutory processes, and they may need to become a looked after child. But this programme is aiming to try and keep as many out of the system as possible, and we describe them as families on the edge of care. The other families then need to be suitable to understand those motivational interviewing techniques, and this process is about dealing with the whole family. So you have to have everybody engaged to make it a success, and again that's based on evidence, international evidence. If you only do it with 1 or 2 children in the family, you're not getting the benefits. So although 16 is a disappointing number, it's comparable with numbers for the size of team seen by IFST teams. Because one of the things that came out of the independent evaluation last year was that we were supporting much more families, far more higher numbers of families with our service model than IFST teams were. So we're keeping an eye on it. The key thing is making sure the right families are in that system and supported. And we'll continue to try and support as many through that. But it's a needs-led service. There will come a point where capacity will be reached, But, you know, we would anticipate more families this year as we learn more about which things work best, which therapeutic interventions worked best, and how do those individual teams get more skilled at bringing on board the reluctant families that don't want to engage before we have to take that legal process. On the next one, the initial assessments within 7 days. Again, 66%, you know, a bit lower than last year. We were about 70%. I describe that as a tolerable acceptance. You know, it would be lovely to have more. But some referrals coming in may not meet our threshold anyway. They're signposted elsewhere. And all professional advice is given at the front line, at the phone call. The critical risks, obviously, are all dealt with by an emergency care order to remove somebody. So don't be alarmed that these figures look as if people are out there being neglected. When anything is critical, we would put in place an emergency care order, you know, through the courts if that was required. The next one then, initial assessment with a child seen by the social worker. Again, a slight...
Sorry, Mary, if we're going to go through this and then come back in with different points then.
Okay, I wanted to ask about that specifically, though.
Yeah. Should we just go through and then we go specific questions then?
Okay. Shall I carry on? Okay. Initial assessment where the child was seen by a social worker, again, you know, 83%. Okay, we didn't meet the target of 90, but, you know, I think that is an acceptable achievement, much better than, you know, the earlier years. If you look at from 2010 onwards, we've been gradually increasing, bit less than last year, but not significantly less. You know, and unless we get more social workers doing the work, we really can't ask them to work any longer hours. Percentage of children with an allocated social worker. Now, I've got a query on that one that I need to come back and check before the report is published, because I thought we'd changed the target there to 85% rather than 100%. But we'll check that back, and even if we had changed it to 85%, obviously you can see we still hadn't met 85%, but it's nearly 77%, so better than that big gap there. And for me, I think, you know, there is something about some of these targets where we're saying, you know, 100%, they're probably too ambitious in the current climate, you know, with the resources we've got available. I think we have to be realistic and honest with ourselves in terms of some of these are aspirational targets, I would describe. I mean, the assurance for you is that anything where a child is at risk, that's where we prioritise the activity of those frontline social workers going forward. The disabled young people who've had an adult link worker in their 14th year, again, you know, better than last year. So pleased to see that that's going in the right direction and a significant improvement. You know, more than double what was achieved the previous year. And again, I would suggest that 87% should be an acceptable target, and we probably need to take that 95% to 90. So give us a bit of a stretch to try and achieve more. But, you know, it's difficult to achieve some of these high aspirational targets. Okay, do you want to stop there and ask questions there?
Right, okay. Councillor Ashley.
Sorry about that. I was going to ask a question on the beginning, because you used an interesting expression there, and on the first four ones there, tolerable risk, and you used the expression staff. You obviously got staff capacity within your statutory responsibilities. Where is your tolerance? This obviously you ain't got enough staff. You're going to have to come back to us and ask for more. Where is this tolerable risk happening?
The tolerable risk is accepting that we may not achieve all of our performance targets because our priority is on keeping children safe. And that's the professional judgment that is made every day by social workers, by the managers who are supervising them, by the heads of service, and by myself challenging.
Where are you going to be pulling staff if you find the tolerance is getting a little bit too narrow?
obviously, we haven't got to that stage. I'm not suggesting that we're at a stage of danger. What I'm suggesting is that the demands on the front line are still very significant. Caseloads are higher than recommended levels, but they are in every authority in Wales. So we're not a significant outlier in terms of workload, but it's not as you would want it. So if you've got the same people trying to deliver all of these performance indicators, they have to prioritise between meeting a target, and that's always a risk, isn't it, with targets. I tell my front line, you must deal with the risks and the needs of the individual people. We'll do what we can behind the scenes to improve processes, to make sure we get our figures improved. But fundamentally, if we get them focusing on targets instead of people, we really, would be going down the wrong track. We have to have confidence that our frontline practitioners are doing everything they can to keep children safe.
I'm glad to hear the word people is what your focus is. But you also just said that you have a comparator there for people across Wales. Is that something obviously you must be regularly reviewing with other social services directors?
Yes, we do. We always keep an eye on a whole range of indicators, the performance measures, obviously, and where we see where we're, at the lower quartile in Wales, we will look automatically to see where in Wales are people at the higher quartile and have that conversation with them. Well, how are you doing that? What are you doing? Is there a trick we're missing? Is there new technology that may be available that we haven't tried yet? One of the things in some of the indicators, not necessarily the ones we've discussed, but some of the others, is the whole issue about the same social workers even having the capacity to record their activity on the system to enable us to demonstrate and evidence that we've done a lot of the things, like the care plans done on time, like the assessments done on time. So we've been working with Matt Lewis's team, to see, are there any technological solutions to that, like voice-recorded technology. His initial assessment from his team has been, it isn't necessarily the time taken to record, which the voice-recorded system would help. It's the complex expectations of both the legal processes and Welsh Government requirements and the amount of information that we have to put into somebody's care plan, and the evidence of what we're doing is having an impact, and the safeguards we're putting in place, the assessment of risk. So even if you converted that from a written one to a verbally spoken one, somebody, a professional, and it can't be left to an administrator, this is about a professional judgment of what they've seen, what children have said to them, what other family members and other professionals have said to them. That is a very sophisticated professional judgment that's what we're paying our professionals for. So, we're looking everywhere at how can we improve the processes and the speediness to make sure we're accurately recording and capturing all of the activity in a timely manner, which could improve some of these performance indicators, but they're not going to move us away or improve the situation where, we could do, if we wanted to improve some of these indicators, it does mean more people being employed at the front line to speed some of those processes up. And, at the moment, the Council hasn't got those additional resources.
Thank you. Councillor Barnett.
Thank you, Chair. You've partly answered my question in your response to the previous question. It's about the initial assessments carried out within 7 working days. And you have explained the barriers with staff resources, etc. But are there any other barriers to meeting that target? In the past, we used to have a problem with records coming in when families moved into the area, and other authorities being very slow in giving that information. And I have no doubt that sometimes the barrier might lie within the family themselves, who for various reasons want to avoid perhaps having that initial assessment. So it's not solely, I think, the fact that our staff are overworked. Sometimes there are barriers outside. How much of a factor do you think that is?
That is a significant factor, and it's also about getting other professionals who we don't directly employ, if they need to be part of that assessment, the logistics about getting all those people together. And it still relates to capacity, because the more times people have to be persuaded to come to meet us, we'll make arrangements, we'll make appointments, they won't turn up. So it's the same social workers who are constantly having to go back to those families, trying to bring them on board, working with them, working with other professionals. It's the same people who are doing all of that chasing. They are the lead, if you like, in terms of pulling together all of that intelligence from the family, from other agencies, and anything that is a delay means we will fail to achieve that target.
Councillor Kemp.
Yes, I think there's a bit of information which is missing, and that's the actual targets for the preceding years as well. And I bring this up because Sue has, in regarding the first row, as in the percentage of statutory visits completed within the timescales. Obviously, we've got the 2010, 11, 11, 12, etc. But we are basically looking at today's target, which is 95%. And now the reason why I'm bringing this up is that Sue stated that the likelihood is that you're going to be reviewing that down to 80%. Now, next year, if we look at 2013 and 14, knowing that on the document it's going to state 80%, we might say that was a damn good year. But in reality, if you look at the targets for this year, which was 95, and so we actually fell below the target, if you like. And so, personally, I would like to see, if you like, what the actual targets for each of those years were as well, so that we can compare. I don't know if fellow...
I can answer that. I mean, obviously what we do is we use the Funan system, and that gives us our trend. So I will look back at, that does two things. It enables us to see what has our performance been over a few years. And, we have to bear in mind the reality of every year. So if you suddenly had an influx of demand on whatever part of the system, you're bound to almost fail to meet the target you set the previous year if your demand was much lower. And that's one of the difficulties with a demand-led service. It really isn't an excuse. It is a genuine reason. And also, the difficult decisions we're having to make as a council, because of the budget situation, it would be crazy, I think, to try and keep those targets at very high aspirational levels when we know we don't have the resources to keep improving in those areas. And I think we have to be mature and pick those critical targets that would demonstrate to us that something was going in the wrong direction or lives were being put at risk. And you have to rely on our professional judgment to help you assess are those the right targets. But all of the trend information is in Funan. And there's two ways of doing it, isn't it? You either leave the target as it is and has been for many years, and then you always fail to achieve it. That's quite disempowering to frontline staff who are feeling under enormous pressure and difficulty to deliver against these targets.
I don't have a problem with the targets being altered, if you like. To give you a good example, is 2013 and 14, 91.79. Now, I don't know if that was a good year or a bad year, because there's no target, if you like, underneath the 91.79. You could have had a target for last year for 75%, if you like. And so with the fact that we're altering the targets now for the forthcoming year, from my perspective, Tom, I would like to have known what the targets were set at for 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013.
Should we bring Tom in to answer that?
I take your point, Councillor Kemp. I can see where you're coming from. I can see the benefits of it. It does give us a few presentational problems, but we'll see what we can do.
Councillor Crick.
Thank you. I do feel Sue's answered this to some extent, but I do feel that somehow we need to capture it. And it is, for example, with the statutory visits, Sue, where so much is now dependent upon the 26-week ruling. That's something that's new, and that's what skewed the difference. And we need to somehow portray that within these figures so that people have a better understanding of what's going on. I must admit, I do feel some of these targets are aspirational only. They're not practicable, and somehow we need to get that across. Whether we should in fact be looking at percentiles, how much you've achieved at 75%, something like that, that might be more helpful. I don't know what other members feel about that.
Yeah, I agree, Councillor Crick. Sue, do you want to come back in? Or?
I guess a lot of these targets are set nationally, so we will always be benchmarked with others, and we would always aim to be as good as you would expect for our type of population. You know, and that's the sort of intelligence I will use to see, well, if they've got a similar cohort of need, we should be performing at the same sort of level. Similarly, if we know comparable levels of resources, frontline social work are available in a similar type of authority, I would want to know, why are my social workers not achieving the same results of others? So, you know, we do that all the time. That is part of our management role. The difficulty you have is, I guess, this is looking at Corporate Plan 2, just for 1 year, and just a set of measures as an exception report. So this will never give you the trend or the whole picture. And as we've said earlier, a lot of our critical, what I would describe as critical targets, are green. But obviously we're not focusing on those today, quite rightly. We're looking at what are the reasons for the underperformance. But, you know, my assurance to you is that we've got our frontline practitioners and our managers focusing on those areas where they need to focus on most. That's the critical thing, I think, for our service area. We're dealing with the vulnerable, and you know, that's got to be, it's about people rather than numbers.
Sue, if I could just come back, Chair. So I agree with you totally, but we've already been told this is going out to the public, and it's very bold. It does need something more to show really how much work your staff are putting in, which we fully support, but it isn't sufficiently upfront in these figures.
And maybe that's something for Tom and I to discuss with Alison in terms about, you know, a narrative to go with it, possibly. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just ask for a piece of clarification about the last measure? When we're talking disabled young people, are we talking both physical disability and learning disability? And can you just define what an adult link worker is and does?
Okay, thank you. It is all types of disability, and it's when somebody is approaching, you know, preparation for adult life, so in their 14th year of age, rather than what previously happened, and it wasn't just here, it was across a lot of local authorities, children's services and adult services were dealt with completely separately. And in England, you may know that they have two separate directorates with two separate directors. Obviously in Wales, we've got a combined service, and it's about the life course of an individual. And previously what was happening across Wales was there weren't very good arrangement. It was almost as if adult services suddenly had a surprise when a child who was disabled and was receiving support from children's social services reached 16 or 17, and we started to then panic about how we're going to support these young adults well into adulthood. So the idea of making sure they have a link worker is for those who, I mean, for anyone who's going to be independent, that's fine, they don't need an adult social services link worker. But it's to help them through that transition from being a child supported in a school environment or a learning environment and getting ready for maybe higher education, independent living or supported living if their needs are significant. So that's exactly what it's for.
Okay, Thank you. Any other members got any comments or questions on item 4? No? Okay, we're going to move on to number 5 then, support and protect vulnerable children.
And do you want to do the same again? I'll go through them.
Yeah, I think that's easier. And then,
Okay.
and I do note that on the first one you have met the targets.
Yeah.
It's just on the rest of them. So if you can just let us know why you didn't meet the
percentage of placements where the child... Oh, yes, GP, right, okay. Again, 96%. I think that's an acceptable tolerance. The whole issue of logistics comes in there, very often children, for very good reasons and the best reasons, are moved from one foster carer to another. It may be to go to a school nearer, other family members. It may be something as simple as not being able to get an appointment with the GP to enable that registration to take place. So, that isn't one that I would suggest you worry about. It's a 96%. Obviously, you'd aim for 100% because it's somebody's health needs. But there is a default position in primary care, which means that there's always, people can be registered as a temporary patient. So there's no risk, again, to individual children there. First, percentage of placements I've looked after that began with a care plan in place. Again, although we haven't met the target, and I would suggest 100% is aspirational, we're better than we were last year, so we're going in the right direction. We're improving in that area, even though we've set ourselves a 100% target. I would still like to leave that, that's one where I'd want to leave that target as 100%, leave that aspirational. That's one I think that we'd like to keep that there. Percentage of young carers known, again, I think that's probably an aspirational target that we may need to reduce down, but significantly higher than last year, 66% last year, and 77% this year. And one of the issues we had with this one was we previously had a lottery-funded additional post for young carers, and that money ran out. We couldn't get that grant again. So we've got fewer resources there designated to young carers than we previously had. So I'm not surprised we haven't reached the 100%, but I'm pleased to see that we are still improving. The percentage of young carers receiving a service, again, I would suggest that target, and I need to discuss this with Richard Clark, possibly that is too aspirational. We're definitely better than we were last year, and again over 10% or nearly a 10% increase to 74% this year. See if we can continue to just slowly improve on that, but probably reduce that down to perhaps a 80% target. And then the health assessments for children, 95%, so I'm suggesting it's slightly down. Again, this is about logistically being able to get children to appointments. And some older children, 16 plus, are refusing to attend. So it's very difficult then to get them to the health assessment. But again, because I think health is such a significant factor, we should keep that target at 100% and aim to keep improving there.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rees?
There seems to be some issues around the target setting. So what is wrong with the target setting process?
I think we've been aspirational. I think that some of the difficult changes we've had to make in terms of the mitigations against the budget impacts don't always follow through the year you make them. So you won't see the impact of a change until possibly a following year. So the young carers one, where the lottery funding ended, you do whatever you can so you keep your aspiration and that target high to still try and achieve that target where the resources reduced. It's only the following year you see the material impact of what that has meant in terms of achieving that target. So you're potentially always having to look back to see why did that reduce. We know why. There was a reduction in capacity a reduction in support, it would make sense to reflect that reduction in support by changing the target going forward.
Councillor Ashley.
Two observations. One, the GP thing. There's a lot of press recently about GPs being under creep because of overusage, and that's worrying. I did make that observation when we were looking at it the other day. That's number one. Number two is the young carers. You've had a very good, I know you've had a very good project. The problem you've got is you've got temporary funding for it, which I know you've got a problem with. But when you stop having that temporary funding, I think possibly reflected there is you need to have some sort of strategy in place to look at the risk with young carers, because the second bit there with young carers, you know, obviously you've got young carers providing the service, and we've got some famous cases, not here but elsewhere, where young carers are providing the service to older parents, that sort of thing, where the possibility of the risk is to the young carer, not to the care for. I mean both in fact, where you're obviously well aware of that, and what risk it is to the young person and to the other person. And to my mind, that risk is reflecting what Councillor Rees has just said, really. You know, in those stats and data is a terrible risk. You know, we don't know the consequences of that elsewhere.
And some young carers, we may offer them a service, but they may refuse. So again, there's an element there of some refusing that support. You know, that does happen, and that's people's rights. You know, we will offer that support. We will say this is available. Do you want to take advantage of it? Some people will refuse that support.
How do you keep a watching brief on that? Because obviously it's not just a case of once for an all refusal. You maybe have to keep doing it, because one of the things that some of us have worked, you know, worked in the past with it, you can't just say, "Oh, that's it, refusal."
No, we never say that. And obviously what we do is we work very closely with schools. So any young carer that is known to us, we alert the schools that those young people are carers and have caring responsibilities. So any you know, anything that the school detects that there is a worrying concern, they would ring us up. You know, these young carers would have named social workers. They know they can contact them at any time, you know, if they need that additional support. And it is very much based on a, you know, risk assessment basis. You know, we will do everything we can to persuade somebody to have support. We'll use other members of the family, particularly extended family members, you know, adults maybe, who could persuade and influence. So we don't give up, and we don't just say, well, we offered and it was refused. We still keep a watching brief.
Councillor Barnett.
Yes, thank you. The bottom box percentage of health assessments, etc. Personally, I think it would have been perhaps valuable for members to be aware of some of the broader categorisation in that box, such as mental health, dental health, general medical health, sexual health, etc. So we can look at where the pressure points are.
Okay. Any other? Oh, Councillor Davis.
Yes, just talking about providing with a service. Are we talking about services provided by the council, or services which the council refers them to as provided by other providers, such as private providers or third sector?
It will be all types of service. So it'll be directly provided, commission services, or, you know, signposted to third sector. It'll be the whole range.
Okay. Any other questions, members? No? Okay, thank you, Sue. We move on to number 6 now. Ensure that people's needs are assessed in a timely manner and the care provided is appropriate. I see that the percentage of packages of care modified, the target's been met there, but the other two, can you tell us why the targets weren't met?
Yeah. I mean, the first one there, plans reviewed during the year, lower than last year, so that is disappointed. You know, but I still think that's an acceptable level, as long as we're over 80%. You know, I think that is acceptable for us. What happens potentially here is We've got many clients now that we're supporting who have very high and complex needs. So they are receiving many reviews because their needs are fluctuating and changing more regularly than they would have previously. So you've got the same social workers trying to deal with multiple reviews for the very high number, which means the consequences, the impact is for some of those who are stable, that's a better way of describing it, we're having to prioritise the ones that are not stable, so it means our target is going down. But I wouldn't suggest reducing that target. I think we need to keep that target as it is. The other thing that happens, because we've got very complex clients with high needs, even when we have review dates, often they have to be rescheduled, so we miss the target because of hospital admissions or other members of the family who need to be part of the review, particularly people who are providing care, not available. So we may have set dates for reviews, but obviously we have to work with the families to make sure that that date for the review is acceptable to the family. So that will throw your target out. That's why we would never achieve 100%, because the vulnerability and the fluctuating needs of some of our clients now means that the older ones particularly are in and out of the hospital system quite regularly. On the next one, the packages of care following the intake intervention. What we're trying to do is, this is why this is a new measure, we're trying to look at what is the impact of the frailty service, which is the community resource team that is mentioned lower down. And at the same time as we're doing that, so we're trying to work out, our intake team is our in-house personal care team. And you'll know that most of our personal care is provided by the independent sector through contracts and commission services. So we're trying to use our intake team in two ways, to both right-size packages of care, and that's the package of care modified, to promote independence. So if we can reduce the support for those people who are starting to improve. They may have had a period of ill health. They may have then been through the frailty emergency care at home team or the reablement team. They may have come into the intake team for a short while. And if they've come out of hospital, they always get 6 weeks free, with no financial assessment. But over time, as they improve after they've had that hospital spell, our aim would be to try and minimise the intervention, both to improve their independence and support them to find support from in their community using other resources, but also to manage our budget strategy. Because if we are keeping high levels of packages of care for individuals who don't still need it, we are denying other people who would have to wait longer because we wouldn't have the resources to keep buying more and more packages of care. That we've done well there, although it was less than last year. Our target was 60%, and we're well over that target. But that's a very complex process in redefining those packages. On the next one then, the percentage of adults supported in the community, that's relating to the 18 to 64-year-old age group there in particular. The Wales average is 86%, so that's why we set our target at 86% to be in line with the Wales average. We've only achieved 80%. That was related to what I describe as data cleansing. What happened during 2013-14, Welsh Government gave further clarity on that target. And things that we were counting in that target included, say, somebody who was at home, who'd had an assessment bias. We provided them with some one-off, non-maintainable equipment like rising chair seat, the leg raisers, the chair raisers, the rising toilet seat. They were all previously counted in our statistics because we did an assessment, they were care managed, we met their needs, and then the case was closed. We used to count all of those in these figures. We've now done the data cleansing to be in line with others. That's where you've seen that significant drop. So that significant drop shouldn't happen again because that was a one-off data cleansing.
Questions on that bit? Thank you. Any questions, members? No? Okay, we'll help you with that one. Let's move on to number 7 then.
Okay. Well, the first one you've already done. That's a duplicate. So I've already talked about that. Delayed transfers of care, that's the next one. Our target was 5 per 1,000 population over 75. We've gone above that target. So again, that's not as we would wish it. A couple of things happened last year. We had the K9 extra care facility being developed last year, but that was several months delayed from planned. A builder went into liquidation, so something completely outside our control. So we started to have a list of people who were waiting to go to Kynant. Some of them were in the hospital system. So that was one of the delays. The other thing that is happening is we've still got the difficulty with insufficient numbers of EMI nursing home placements to meet our needs, whereas we may have a plethora of other general nursing and residential where our needs, the population's needs change, obviously. So it means the choice of care home is becoming less. So it means people are taking longer whilst they're in the hospital system, once it's been determined that a care home is the right solution for them, because we do everything we can to avoid a care home for as long as possible. Means that, unfortunately, because that choice is reduced, they'll take longer with the capacity being reduced. And the other thing, unfortunately, that's happened in Torfaen and in other parts of Wales, even though we are, relatively, well, perhaps not generous is the word, but certainly on a par with others in terms of our care home fees, most providers now in Torfaen are expecting families to pay a third-party top-up. And that's fine if the family has the resources to pay that top-up. That's extra cash on top of what the council pays once they've been means tested. But unfortunately, again, we don't have additional funds, and the council isn't allowed to pay that anyway. It has to be paid for by a third party. So that's a national issue across Wales. There's a national care homes task and finish group being established. The care sector, is vulnerable. You have probably seen the report on Operation Jasmine published yesterday. A real concern about maintaining and improving the quality of care in the residential setting. And we're working with health service colleagues and neighbouring local authorities to continue to improve there. So with the current financial situation, I can't see that improving going forward. So it's a case of whether we keep the target as it is, or whether we reduce the target to make it more achievable. But again, it's one of these highly political, national and local areas of focus. We do all we can to try and manage that. The next one then, the percentage of clients in the supported in that age group 18 to 64. Again, I think 93.56, that's acceptable. We shouldn't worry too much about that. And this can be dependent on fluctuating need. The ratio that is important is the relative percentage of those supported at home and those supported in the care sector. That's the critical thing we've got to keep an eye on. We don't want more and more people going in the care sector in a residential setting until it is the best option for them. So we're just keeping that check on that balance. Again, the next one is similar. It's just the age 65 plus. It's making sure, again, because fluctuating needs does mean that some people will get to the stage where a residential setting is their best option. The percentage of occupancy of intermediate care beds, these were additional beds that were funded by the intermediate care fund that we had last year. And we purchased them in a range of places, extra care facility, residential and nursing home. And it's very difficult to try and anticipate what's going to come through the door. And obviously that they're used to prevent admission or support early discharge from hospital before somebody goes home or into a longer term setting of their choice. And very often, so say for example if two of them are in a nursing home, the next clients that come through that would be suitable, their needs could be met by extra care, but that extra care facility may already be filled. So it's one of those areas where we are block booking a certain number of beds, But because it's demand-led, you genuinely don't know what's going to come through the door. And we'll use that first 2 years of evidence and understanding to inform our future commissioning intentions to see, do we need more of this, less of that, and we'll adapt as we go forward. No, that's a different one. What's the next one? Oh, direct payments, I think the next one. Again, you know, this is demand-led. We're trying to promote older people taking up the offer of direct payments, but they are reluctant. And we're not dissimilar to other parts of Wales. And really, you know, there's no point to setting a target any higher than 140, really, until we get nearer to that. So it almost ought to be maybe a 3-year plan to get to that that sort of target, but we'll still keep promoting it. Shall I stop there for any questions on that bit?
Yeah, we go back to number 7. Sorry.
Sorry, I didn't realise
I
that was
think
a
you
different
jumped
number.
over to number 8. That's fine. Councillor Barnett.
Thank you. I mean, bearing in mind the fact that housing has devolved to the Welsh Government, benefits, of course, are not, I wonder whether you've had time to ponder on whether we're going to have more vulnerable young people with some of the rather draconian cuts that are being made in the budget. For example, I've got the Red Book here, which I think ought to be in a blue cover because it certainly made me very blue. It says, to prevent young people slipping straight into a life on benefits, from April 2017, the budget will also remove the automatic entitlement to housing support for new claims in universal credit from 18 to 21-year-olds who are out of work. They do put in a caveat that, you know, there are some exclusions for vulnerable young people, but I would maintain that those who are not vulnerable soon will be if they have to perhaps sofa surf or sleep out in the big cities, etc. Have we had a look at how some of the budget proposals can skew some of our aspirations?
I almost think it's too scary to look. You know, yes, there will be an impact, I'm sure, but we're not seeing the impact yet. But I would suspect that that particular change will result in more presentations to the homelessness service. So again, wearing my other hat, homelessness, we may see homelessness presentations being presented. So we're keeping a close eye on that to have a look. But again, there are rules around who we can support and who we can't support, and there are limits on the housing budget as well. You know, so it's going to be potentially difficult, but we'll try and monitor and respond wherever we can. But, you know, we've got very good relationships with our registered social landlords, Melin, Bronavon and others, to try and make sure we, you know, protect the young, and particularly the young vulnerable, you know, with any of the capacity that we do have.
Councillor Mills.
Thank you, Chair. So if you go to the area where it says percentage of clients aged 65 who are supported in the community, although we haven't missed the target by much, are we getting to the position where we support them in the community that is becoming so expensive it's actually cheaper to expect those people to go into residential care?
If you remember, I brought a paper to Cabinet proposing that we look at what should be the usual maximum cost of a package to support somebody at home. Because there is no doubt that for some people with very high needs, it is very difficult to sustain that, not just financially, but in terms of guaranteeing that the right level of support is available whenever you need it. You know, so that is a conversation that we do have with individuals. So Cabinet gave me approval to consult on that proposal. We're in that process of consulting. So it is one of the options we put forward as one of the difficult choices in terms of managing our budget. You know, and it's reluctant. We don't like doing this, but that is the necessary choices that we have to make going forward. You know, we have to balance the books. So, you know, I think potentially that particular target may need to be revised going forward. But as long as we've got the balance right between those supported in a care home setting is significantly less than those we're supporting in their own home. But yeah, those difficult decisions, I'm sure, will come forward.
Okay. Any other members' questions? No? Okay, thank you. Let's move on to number 8 then.
Okay, I think I've already
Richard,
explained number 8, sorry, 'cause I
you've
didn't realise
done-
it was a...
Yeah, okay. Any questions on number 8? No? Okay, we'll move on to improve access to social care services, number 9. So can you let us know, Sue, why targets weren't met
Yeah,
in
I
this
will do.
section?
Okay. That first one, yes, percentage of clients supported in the community. This is the 18 to 64-year-old. 93.5%, so, only just below. I'm not worried about that. And it is about fluctuating needs, complex needs. The DFG customer satisfaction, nearly 90%. For me, I think the target probably should be 90%. I think we put 97% last year for this year because that's what we achieved the previous year. But I think that is acceptable. I'm not worried about that one. The detox we've discussed earlier. Number of calendar days taken to deliver a low-cost adaptation, which is outside the DFG process. Again, we've got more complex needs, therefore we've got more referrals coming through. More assessments needed to be done by OTs, and we have to prioritise those with the highest risk. So delays are likely, and what we try and do here is we use care and repair more to do some of the lower level adaptations and changes. And we had ICF funding for them in 2013-14. Unfortunately, we didn't get that for this year, so we may see a deterioration there. So again, maybe that target of trying to do that within 12 days, because it's not just providing the kit, you've got to have a professional assessment done to make sure we understand what is needed. It's got to be measured to fit the person, put in the right location in the house, if it's handrails or ramps. So it's not a simple case of saying everything can be done, after a 30-minute phone call. But it's moving in. It's moving in the right direction over the last couple of years, but we probably need to relook at that. Was that the last one on number 8?
Any questions or comments on number 9? Okay, Councillor Rees?
It's more of a general question, really. It's coming back to how your service level arrives at its targets. Could you tell us the process by which you do arrive at your targets?
The process that we arrive at to get the targets, we look back, so we look at the trends in terms of how we've achieved every year. We look at benchmarking activity, so how have we compared with others in Wales. We particularly look at similar sized organisations, so Conwy is a good example that we use as a kind of benchmark for if they can do that in Conwy, we ought to be able to do it here. And particularly for DFGs, if you remember, we were in the bottom of the league about 3 or 4 years ago. We used Conwy and Neathport Talbot because they'd had a major transformation to set ourselves more realistic targets with an action plan in place to get over the line. But we also, so that's looking at the backward position, we're also looking at the forward. So do we know from demographic profiles that we're going to get significantly more older people, say, with complex needs? So if you are, you're never going to be able to achieve continuous improvement whilst you've got the same level of resources. So it's a balance of looking back, looking at the resources you have, looking at your demographic profile, trying to anticipate what the future will look like and what the need will be. Those 3 elements combine together to make a professional judgment on what is a realistic target.
And who's in the team that actually decides on the target? Is it you and who else?
Well, the heads of service will do it with their team. So, for example, if it's DFGs, it's actually the physical disability team. They will have the same conversation. So it's the relevant team that is pertinent to the target. They will have that conversation within those teams. Group managers managing those teams will potentially say, yeah, that sounds reasonable. They will present that as options to my leadership team. That's me and my heads of service. At the same time, I'm having the same conversation with Alison in terms of my performance reporting. So, you know, when I'm being assessed or the executive member is being assessed, we'll have those conversations there, you know, and Alison and I will have a dialogue about, is that a reasonable target? Yeah.
How often do you review your targets during the year?
Every quarter, yeah.
Do you have any input from the finance service function of the council in the target setting?
Not in the target setting per se, but we have obviously the support of Tom, Lynn Williams, Helen and others, you know, so the performance team. But the finance team would help us more on the forecasting of the financial situation and trend analysis on spend, which obviously we use then, you know, ultimately it's us who decide in the service area with the exec member on where we put our resources, where we focus our priority. So we'll use any expertise from inside the council, but also neighbouring authorities to see what they're doing. So, you know, it's a continuous process of constantly looking, constantly adjusting, reviewing, when it's legitimate to change the target, not changing the target just to make us look good or look bad. Well, we'd never do it to look bad. But, you know, there's always a rationale behind why are we saying this is an aspirational target, and let's see if we need to change that.
Councillor Powell.
Thanks. Yeah, just on targets again, following on from that, how many of these sort of have a statutory basis of why they're at the level they are? I mean, are there many that we can't change, for example? And again, because so many of these seem to be quite aspirational, you know, given the current climate, are we not putting them down for another reason, like, you know, say for inspections coming in, you know, or is it just that, you know, we haven't had to in the past?
No, we never put them down for an inspection because, you know, that would be pointless in a way. That would almost like trying to pretend we were better than we were.
You know, not to try and like fool the inspector, but because you're not allowed to drop them down, I meant, rather than... do you see what I mean?
Yeah, there's a whole mix. Some of them are a national target, others are benchmark targets. So there's a whole mix, and off the top of my head, I couldn't point out which ones are which, to be honest. But anything that is set nationally, obviously, we have to abide by those. We can't change those. But where we've got flexibility, we try and make them meaningful and realistic. You know, and I think we've probably been too aspirational, not anticipating the significant, you know, financial challenges that we're all facing.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Davis.
Coming back onto the last one, just as a point, with the adaptations, is it possible that maybe doing worse than that because of, say, the nature of the properties that are having to be taken up, particularly with regards to the age and nature and location of certain properties?
Doesn't tend to be as bad in these lower level adaptations, but certainly but it is a factor, definitely. You know, the fabric of the building doesn't lend itself sometimes to modern types of equipment being put in. But certainly when you're doing significant adaptations under the Disabled Facilities Grant, that is a significant barrier to us achieving those targets for getting things turned around within the targets. Because, you know, very often builders will go in, they'll lift something in order to fit something, and we'll discover a whole array of other things underneath. Could be lead piping, it could be a drain that nobody knew about. You know, so there's all sorts of technical difficulties that people come across.
Okay, no more comments on that section? Okay, let's move on then to Appendix 3, which is on page 27 of the agenda. Right, these are all demand-led measures for 2014-15. So, Sue, can you give us some reasoning to why targets can't be set?
I'll give you my honest opinion. I think if we set targets for these, we've got the risk that our professionals will become focused on the targets rather than the risk of vulnerable people. And I really do think that is, a dangerous approach. I mean, if you think of looked after children, for example, there is, high pressure to get those numbers down because we don't want children looked after if it's better that they're staying in their own family home. We only take those children into care when we really do see that there is a risk of harm. And I think you have to trust our professional judgment that that is the case. Only one case in 10 years has ever been rejected by the courts in terms of Torvine children. So, thousands of children, we've presented the case to the court to say we think this child needs to be looked after. One child in 10 years where they said we were perhaps being a bit overzealous is a pretty good record, I think. So the courts, if you like, back up our approach. Obviously, what we're trying to do is we don't want children in care. We've got a long-term strategy in terms of early intervention and prevention, working with other agencies and other parts of the council, particularly schools, particularly Flying Start, Sure Start, those other programmes that sit in education rather than in social care, to try and support families to look after their children more effectively, because ultimately it's about preventing, isn't it? That's going to be the solution. The other thing we're trying to do is, and we've got an Invest to Save bid in for this, because, as I described earlier, our practitioners quite rightly are focused on the highest risk and meeting court deadlines for paperwork and assessments, etc. Some children may be looked after, but they're actually in their own family home. But because we still have to monitor them, and they're on our care management system, that takes up an awful lot of social work time. Now, if I tell you at the minute, our report at the end of the year was 291. That's been, in 2010, we were 290, 297 the following year, 300, the highest we got was 304, I think. And we're now at this current, today we are 280, so we're definitely going in the right direction. So that's the lowest since 2010, but obviously it's always a snapshot, isn't it? Every day more children might come in. Tomorrow, others may go back out of the system. And that does fluctuate daily. But out of that 280, 50 of those are kinship carers, so placed with extended members of the family. 40 of them are placed with parents under regulations, and 4 were changed with children under an interim care order. And we're waiting a decision on the courts for that. So although our numbers are relatively high, 96 of those are being actually supported in their own family. So our Invest to Save proposal is to give us some additional capacity, because we haven't prioritised those because they're safer than others. But that Invest to Save proposal that we're hoping to get funding for this year will be to have a dedicated social worker to go through the court processes, to do all the paperwork, etc., that it is, and the assessments that is needed, so we can get some of those children off the looked after children cohort. So, again, it's our strategy, our strategic approach, look after those who are in the system as well as we can, move some of them out as quickly as we can with this additional capacity, but prevent them coming in. That's our longer term strategy, by using other people's resources, empowering teachers, health visitors, others, to be able to support families better to provide that need. So, I don't want to set targets for these. I think as long as we need to monitor to make sure we're not out of line with others. But I don't want to tell our social workers you're not allowed to have more than 3 children on the register. If the right children are on the register, the right children are on the register. So, I think a target approach on that is absolutely the wrong approach.
Any members got any questions on that one? Councillor Morby?
Yeah, this is a really tricky one, I think, because we're talking about targets. And maybe we ought to be talking more about performance, which targets may give a clue to performance, but they don't tell the whole story. And we've been trying to deal with this for years and years, haven't we, in terms of whether the target setting process actually mirrors how well social services within Torvine is doing. And sometimes you get misleading or perverse conclusions as a consequence of looking at the numbers. And I think probably we need to give some more thought to it, because I would say that the number of children who are regarded as being in need of protection and on the at-risk register, and indeed the number of children who come into care, are indicators of a problem within Torvine relating to the care of children, put it simply. Fairly obvious, and therefore the fewer we have, the better. And it's perhaps important that we have a target which looks at reducing the number of children who are in those circumstances, basically. Once they're in care or on the child protection register, then you need measures as to how well we're dealing with that. Maybe how quickly they come off the child protection register, how quickly they come out of care, whether they are with kinship families, that how they're looked after, I suppose, is, again, an important consideration which needs to be looked at. You wouldn't necessarily say the same with older people, and I know we may get to that, but in terms of looking how successful we are in dealing with older people who need support, that's a consequence of age, for the most part, rather than the fact that they are a child. A child is an innocent victim, if you like. I'm not saying that older people are not innocent or victims, but in a sense they're victims of the fact that they are growing older. And therefore the numbers we are able to support within the community and have to provide services for there is perhaps a target of how well we are doing in response to the fact that they are growing older and a greater proportion of society within Torvine are made up of old people, and they need those services. Conversely, the number who are in residential or nursing care, i.e. not able to live independently at home, is perhaps also, to some extent, an indication of need, which comes with old age, but it also kind of indicates a failure in those cases of being able to care for them within the community, i.e. the normal community of their own home. So perhaps the more we have to look after in institutions, the worse we're doing. And it's the same with the health service. The more you have in hospital, the worse you are doing. But actually, if you're treating people who are ill and you're making them healthy again, then you're doing a good thing. So there's a lot of perversities in all of this, and I think we do need to think it through. I would like to see, I must confess, percentage and numeric targets in relation to children in care and children who are on the at-risk register. I'd like to see targets which indicate, or performance measures which indicate how long they're on the register or in care, because I think that's a good indication as well. And that's as far as my thinking has gone. I'm not really helping very much, because when it comes to older people at the other end of the spectrum, I've got views about what should be our performance criteria and what targets we should be looking for, but I haven't really sort of thought through all the consequences of that, because sometimes you will put down a target which actually is a perverse one, and instead of indicating it as you meet it that you're doing better, it will indicate that you're doing worse. And I just think, we need to think that through again to see if we can come up with something which is going to be more meaningful, not just for ourselves, but also the public who deserve to know about our performance and whether we think we are doing well, and being allowed to differ if they think that it's not a good performance.
Can I answer those? I agree with you. I mean, the difficulty is being performance measured against it, isn't it? Certainly, our target is to reduce the numbers down. I think in terms of looked after children on the Child Protection Register, but a lot of those are out with the capability of social services. It's about working with others to prevent them coming in, and obviously doing as much as we can to get them home as quickly as possible, if home is going to be the best outcome for those children, or into the adoption system if they're going to have a home in adoption. So we do look at those timelines. They're not presented here. Obviously, this is only an exception report. And a lot of the information you talked about is certainly shared in the corporate parenting panel. So some of that data that you were talking about, how long, how well, but it's, it isn't in this information here. I think what I was saying was, I'm not against targets at all. I think they're great. I don't want frontline practitioners worrying about a target and then being afraid to bring a child in or put them on the child protection register because they may go over the target. That's really what I was saying. We've got to make sure that they're doing the right thing whilst we monitor our other strategies to reduce those numbers down, whether it's the prevention or whether it's get them out of the care system through that invest to save. So, I'm absolutely with you on that. I wouldn't want it put down as a number, I suppose. That's the risk. The other thing for me is when you come to older people, the other target that isn't here, which is the relevant one that you're talking about, because we're green and we're doing very well, it's about that comparator, the rate per 1,000 people who are maintained in their own home relative to in a residential setting. And we're green on those because we're moving in the right direction. For as long as we can, people are supported at home. And even though the numbers are going up and it's more complex, we're still keeping that rate, we're still meeting that target. Now, there may come a point in time, whether it would be through budgetary situation, where we may be having more people in a residential setting, those very high needs, if they're costing more at home. But we will do all we can to keep them at home. That indicator isn't here, but that's green. So, we look at that as well, and we're definitely in the right trajectory there. I worry about the target-driven culture, if it's going to change practice when you're in a risk, business. That's my only concern about trying to put a number against it. But yeah, definitely the numbers are coming down.
Councillor Ashley.
It's good to hear you using narrative, which is what we're struggling with, I think, because the problem with targets is actually doing that. But you've got some useful data there, which actually helps that data, helps that narrative. And you're pretty good at describing that, and maybe the data does that. I think, Tom, we've sat in a few things where people at scrutiny conferences have talked about this, and it's how you get that picture over, because you've got a good news story, I think, on some of this, certainly on the elderly bit, in what you're achieving. Bearing in mind you've got to illustrate risk, and you've got to illustrate what you can do with a descending budget, as it were. So, I think maybe different ways of illustrating this is probably, am I making sense with that language, illustrating it without necessarily using targets? There's different sorts of language we could use, and maybe different ways of illustrating. The thing that stumps me every time I look at this is that big NA, it doesn't tell us anything. And discussions we've had with Tom and things, how you illustrate that, and obviously bearing in mind my audience we've got looking at this today, getting it over and showing what we're doing and why we're doing it. Probably this set of data on this end, on this particular one, is a problem. I mean, Brian's gone through that quite well. I think he's understanding, and that's quite good.
Can I just add one more thing? The other reason why we count some of this activity, like number of people in residential care, is to inform our commissioning intentions. So it's not about our performance, but it's about trying to analyse what has been the need over the last few years. So therefore, do we need to decommission or reduce some of that activity and purchase more of that activity? So we're trying to be, much more alert to what are the numbers looking like. So I would describe it as management information to enable us to decide and determine where do we put our resources to get best effect, whether it's the services we commission externally, or whether it's the activity of our frontline practitioners. So that is what I would describe as management information that we need to do our business. But not really, I wouldn't suggest. I don't think that's for public consumption, and it's nothing to do with performance, when it's just a pure number. So it's information we use to help our commissioning intentions. And, don't forget, the eligibility criteria changed last year, again because of budget limitations, in terms of critical and substantial, whereas previously we would have supported moderate. So you would have potentially had more people being supported through our directly commissioned services. Now we try and signpost them to other areas.
You're getting a lot of interesting lexicon coming in here as well, aren't you, about the words you use? Maybe we need a dictionary to go with this.
Councillor Barnett.
Right, thank you. I totally, I'm heartened to hear your remarks about target setting, because I think we're looking after the rights of people, not percentages, and we mustn't lose our focus on that. Could I refer to what was said earlier about the elderly? I think there are issues where the elderly are victims that really should become responsibility of the LSB. It's not perhaps solely that they're suffering from abuse in their own homes by those who care for them in other homes, but whole business of scams that have been affected, sometimes costing them life savings, and all those preventative measures and education measures from trading standards and others that need to come into being, particularly, for example, now with people's rights to convert their pensions into, not Lamborghinis, nobody around in this valley would have enough in their pension pot. Oh, we've got one, but it's not going to be from the councillor's pension. But, there are very real worries here that can affect many service delivery areas, not just social services, who always seem to have to bear the brunt. And I would want to know what kind of discussion of collaborative preventative working is going on at LSB level.
I can certainly tell you about things like the Be Independent programme, which is again trying to make sure, first of all, identify potential vulnerable older people who may be living on their own. So that's an area of trying to identify across the borough. They may not have social care needs, they may not have significant health needs, but they may be lonely, and they may not have family networks. So that Be Independent programme is to do exactly that, to give people a lifeline, to connect them to other people, so that we can be alerted to. The police are involved, if there are scams, the sort of thing you described, messages can go out to people. We've got community connectors funded through ICF. Again, we're trying to make much better use of the community resources themselves. So instead of it being a specialist social service or a specialist health or a specialist housing professional, there are lots of ward members, for example. There is lots of people out there who can become useful sources of information for people who are potentially vulnerable. And I think, you described very well some of the potential risks of some of the changes that are being made. So, working with people like Citizens Advice Bureau to make sure those messages are cascaded, using the 50+ forums, where you've got active engagement of people, north, mid and south of the borough. Again, the third sector, Age Connect, Age Concern, they do a lot of literature and newsletters which give people information about sources of help, sources of advice.
Thank you, Sue. Councillor Mills.
Thank you, Chair. Just for members' information, when we're looking at the Child Protection Register and the number of looked after children, the Healthier Scrutiny Committee is about to actually scrutinise that. So a number of the points that have been brought up this afternoon, we will actually be scrutinising soon.
Thank you, Councillor Mills. Councillor Crick.
Thank you. I was just sort of cross-comparing some of these figures, Sue, and I'm wondering whether it's possible, and it's probably going back to what Councillor Morby was saying as well, could be put in a different way or linked together. For example, we heard in the earlier section about the average number of calendar days to deliver low-cost adaptation works so that people could live in their homes. And then you've got here under 6, number of people help to live at home during the year, and that's fallen by half virtually, which suggests there must have been quite a bit of work going on. And then we've got number of referrals in 8 into community resource team, and that's gone up by a third. So there must be some kind of family of information there that perhaps needs to be linked a bit more closely.
That's the danger with targets, isn't it? You know, you're only looking at snapshots of one particular element. Be assured, in my head, I kind of keep them all on track, if you like. I know which things are going in the right direction. So to use those examples, the numbers of people helped to live at home during the year, again, because we changed our eligibility criteria, we anticipated there would be a significant reduction. Earlier I mentioned about the numbers we were able to count previously that had non-maintainable equipment. Now you've taken those numbers out, that would also significantly reduce. And obviously what we're trying to do as well, we're trying to, with our adult duty hub, manage demand away. So as they come to us, we're signposting them to third sector and other agencies. So again, we're having less people coming at the door. So there's those 3 elements happening. On the community resource team, obviously that is specific to frailty. So, that is about, the frailty service has been a couple of years still in development. It's not a fully embedded service yet, because because it's an Invest to Save programme that funds it, you have to have an annual commissioning plan, and it's an incremental increase over years. So it's only in the next year or two that we'll have the full capacity of the team. So you would expect more data to go up. And there's a direct correlation with, so the numbers of referrals into the community resource team, that's massively gone up, and that is about people in the hospitals being more aware of frailty, GPs being more aware of frailty, so more people are knocking on the door saying, please, can you help us? So again, we are, there's higher complex needs, so people are in the frailty system for longer when they are in, and there's more of them, and as more practitioners and professionals know about the service, more will come up. But again, it's what I would describe as that is management information rather than performance information that enables us to redirect our resources. So if the CRT team, we planned it to monitor or to manage a caseload, say, of 50 a week, I'm just making that figure up. If by looking at the trend, you suddenly see it's trebled, then we can justify more investment in a particular part of the frailty service because we've got the evidence to demonstrate the demand has increased. It's not a performance measure, I wouldn't describe it as that. It's an activity measure that is management information that enables us to either increase resources, decrease resources, or move them, focusing on a different way.
Again, I think, Sue, this is because we here may well appreciate that, but the people outside who have this presented to them won't necessarily do so. Perhaps we need a little bit more in the narrative to make it clearer.
Appendix 3 will be published, but only as part of the whole document, and that document will also have a lot of narrative around the activities that not just Sue's teams, but education and the waste service, which are our priorities. So there will be lots of narrative as part of the plan as well.
Okay. Right, so I think have we covered most of the report now? I would like to ask them, in number 8, you've got the number of service users receiving meals at lunchtime, and then the services used in receiving meals in the evening are nil. Can you just tell us why?
Yeah. And again, we're trying to do this for, monitoring who needs what services when. What normally happens with most people is they'll have a hot meal at lunchtime, but then a packed evening tea will be left with them. But, you know, we're trying to assess whether there is any demand for a hot evening meal. So we're trying to count it again to see, you know, is that something we need to think about in the future? Yes, nil at the minute, but that may, you know, it may be appropriate for some dietary condition or, you know, some of the reason where we may have to start thinking about a meal in the evening rather than in the lunchtime. And, you know, that's why we're monitoring it. The other thing, of course, is lots of councils now have decommissioned their meal service and don't provide it, and individuals, you know, go to the independent sector and purchase meals and have them delivered through a range of other agencies. And you may remember a few years ago, one of the things we were looking at was whether we could just ask the schools to prepare the meals and deliver them. That wasn't an option, because we're continuously looking at how do we save money, how can we make things more efficient. The other thing we've done is we've asked Monmouthshire whether they wanted to collaborate and have because you can usually make something more efficient if you have a bigger level of it. But it was going to cost us more, basically, because Monmouthshire is so much more rural. So it would have meant additional vans, additional staff, and it wouldn't advantage Torfaen. But when we move, if we do, into a Gwent arrangement, you know, that may be something to look at again. Or it may be that some of those independent sector providers, the quality of their provision improves and it's continuously being improved. And it may be we may want to outsource in the future. So by monitoring the activity, it'll help us inform those future decisions.
Thank you, Sue. Councillor Kemp.
Yes, it's under number 7 and the second one, the number of service users receiving telecare and community meals. Why have they been put together but recorded separately?
This goes back to some of the statistics previously. We counted some of these things in the percentages help to live at home. Welsh Government have clarified those data requirements, but we still want this information to enable us to think about what is the need out there. So this is management information rather than performance information. Again, described as the others, we need to monitor where is the demand, but so we know who is needing what, so we know whether to buy more of it, less of it, move our resources around. And obviously what we want is more people to be helped with telecare and community meals rather than other more expensive interventions like supported living or residential settings. If we can keep them at home with telecare or with community meals with perhaps a small package of care going in, you know, that helps us, it keeps them more independent, it's more economically beneficial to the council. That's why we want to count them. So it's management information rather than performance information.
Because they're two separate things, aren't they? If like we were just wondering why they've been packaged together and not separately, if you like.
Well, I guess what we're trying to demonstrate is, for most people with quite complex needs who are being supported at home, they potentially need 3 things mainly. Or 4, if you like. They'll need equipment to enable them to get in and out of bed. They'll need personal care to help them wash and dress, feeding, possibly taking medication, you know, so you'll need hands-on support. Telecare is, more and more advances are being made in terms of telecare. So somebody who's got mental health problems and may be prone to wander, we can put sophisticated monitoring systems in to make sure if they open their door, we know about it, we're alerted, we can alert a support agency. And obviously community meals. If somebody can't help themselves to get a meal and they have no family or friends to do that for them. So, you know, what we're trying to monitor is who's using what, how many of this particular service do we need? Because, you know, we can't afford to be purchasing things that are not needed. So we have to constantly adjust how much of this we're buying relative to how much of that we're buying. So it helps us, you know, we need to know it's a different provision for telecare, it's a different team providing meals. And, you know, we've got to be realistic. As the pressures on finances get even tougher, If there is surplus anywhere in the system, I need to know where that surplus is in terms of staff, so I can divert it to where there's pressure. So it's management information for our business.
I totally agree with what you've said, but what I and the other councillors, when it comes to the pre-agenda, we didn't know why, if like telecare was in the same box as community meals, and why there wasn't a separate box for telecare and a separate box for the community meals, because you put the two together. That's all. But if that's all.
Councillor Ashley.
It struck me that with these telecare and community meals and that sort of thing, if there's after your presentation, you did a seminar where you went on about the Health and Wellbeing Act, where a lot of facilities are going to be either have to be paid for by people themselves or whatever. Bearing in mind that we've had recent scrutiny committees looking at collaborative working and also social enterprises and development. There's a lot of this data set you've got sat here is actually very, very useful for anybody looking in that direction without, bearing in mind that we've already got teams delivering this. If the implication is that some of this is not going to be done in future because of risk and budgets, unless it's activity it must be done, so from a statutory point of view, there's a lot of opportunity here for generating employment in this area. It just seems too good a thing to miss. I mean, would that data sort of be available to promote within the not-for-profit and other sense, because we certainly got a golden opportunity to, mitigate a lot of this by generating new opportunities. It's the sort of thing that elsewhere in Wales, I suspect, you know a lot about in terms of that sort of employment generation.
Certainly part of the new Act is about promoting social enterprises. And I think that is a challenge for us. In North Wales, they seem to have more success and more social enterprises have been emerging for many years. And I like the concept of social enterprises because it usually is local people defining a local need and developing a local service. We work with our economic development partners here in the council and with neighbouring authorities to see, and that's the purpose of monitoring some of this activity, isn't it? Because if we know there's a need, but it's more economical to do it across Gwent or across a couple of authorities, we would work with those authorities to say, okay, well, shall we have a joint commissioning plan and with the NHS, if it makes sense to do so, and let's develop that service on a collaborative basis. You make it more efficient, you make it more sustainable. But, I'm not against the independent sector or the third sector doing it either. As long as it's good quality and it's value for money, then those are the parameters for me, and our commissioning infrastructure and our procurement processes always puts quality above cost because we're dealing with very vulnerable people. So we usually go for a 60-40, so people have to meet that threshold. The other thing we do is, we have published our commissioning strategies for both adults and children. So we have regular meetings with providers out there, third sector and independent sector. So we're out there always telling people about what our current and future service needs are. People who are interested know where to come and ask, and they'll be supported by our commissioning team.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you for your very detailed report. Going forward, then, do you think that there's any of the measures that could be target? Or you could set targets for going forward?
Possibly, we need to have a look at what are the risks in setting targets. Because what I don't want to do is set the council up to look like it's failed. Because an awful lot of this is genuinely demand-led. That's why we use that phrase. And personally, I'm not against or for targets. They are useful, but they have to be seen in the context of a snapshot at a point in time And maybe the target is the wrong word. So maybe there's something about, what is the service direction without putting a number against it. So to be a bit more explicit about, going up is better or going down is better. And that may be, maybe something, but, I think it's something we need to think about carefully, purely because of the rapid decisions we're going to have to make in terms of the budgetary implications of some of these things. So we don't want to set ourselves up, do we, to say we're going to deliver this next year, suddenly I'm going to have to take that team down or reduce it by half, and there's no way I'm going to be able to meet that target. So I'm trying to be open and realistic here about what I anticipate the future looking like. I would prefer personally to call that management information rather than targets, because we could be, setting ourselves up to fail if we describe it, but certainly a narrative that says the direction of travel is. I've just seen it happen in the past where the focus is on targets, but people miss the point. They hit the target but miss the point, and vulnerable people have been, impacted by that, and I don't want us in that situation.
Okay, thank you. So, any member? Councillor Morby.
Yeah, I think we've just started the discussion, basically, and Sue's given her response to questions which you didn't have a preview of. So I think it's a time for reflection, and as I think I said in the planning meeting, it seems to me to be more appropriate to pursue any issues which arise relating to any particular service in the appropriate scrutiny committee, rather than have a huge or potentially huge number of participants in an all council scrutiny. So, and I think Ray's already indicated that there is more information which the corporate parenting panel have, and which no doubt the Healthier Communities Scrutiny Committee will have from time to time. So I think that's the venue for a further discussion. And I would just invite Sue and Ray to think about whether there are some measures in here which could be made into targets to reflect the state of sort of health, if you like, of Torvine. Health is the wrong term, but I think it's important that we are able to see that what we've agreed is a priority service, social services, particularly in relation to vulnerable people, who generally I would class as those who are children, those who are old, and those with disabilities, don't suffer as a result of being in the recession. I think that's how it was worded when it was set up about 5 or 6 years ago. And we've continued with that, and as we're looking at the potential for Corporate Plan 3, all services are going to be reviewed in terms of their priorities or otherwise. And I think from that, we need to be able, or as part of that, perhaps, we need to be able to consider and be part of the discussion about whether or not current priorities need to be changed in a manner which reflects where needs have changed in the last 5 or 6 years. And maybe that's going to rely on management information or targets or performance, whatever you call it. Maybe that will be an important part of actually reaching a conclusion about what those priorities would be for Corporate Plan 3. So I suppose very long-windedly, I'm suggesting that Healthier Communities Scrutiny Committee could perhaps look at this in more detail with a view to, sort of recognising that this is an issue which is going to be part of the discussion when we try and review priorities for Corporate Plan 3. Thanks.
Yeah, one of the things I forgot to mention that I was going to say, we know the new Social Services and Wellbeing Act are going to announce more different targets. Some of them will stay the same, and certainly the move from Welsh Government, which I think is welcome, is about measuring outcomes. So it picks up what Brian said about how well are we doing, what's the difference on the individuals out there. The challenge for us, I think, is measuring outcomes on an individual basis you can do, and you can show direction travelled. Doing that aggregated for a cohort of people or a whole population, the jury is out on how realistic that is. But that is the aspiration. So I'm sure that will be another learning process we'll go through. But I would prefer to be counting meaningful activity that shows what difference does we make and are we improving people's lives or keeping them safer, than little numbers that on their own really are a bit arbitrary. But they, an awful lot, let's be realistic, across the public sector, we count things because we can count them. Don't we? And we generate an awful lot of data simply because it's easy to count. The things that are more difficult to count, like how good was your life, or, how well did that social worker assess your need, it's much easier to count how long did she take rather than how well was it done. And I think that's the challenge for all of us, isn't it? And that's my reservation about adding more targets. We become more target driven rather than what difference are we making.
Okay, thank you, Sue. Right, well, I think we've covered everything, so I'd just like to thank Sue and Tom for coming along today and giving us your views and overview. And all that's left now is to go through the recommendations. Would members like to come up with any, thank you Sue, any recommendations, or should we ask Kath to go through what we've got? Yeah? Kath? Okay. Over to you.
Okay. Hopefully I've captured everything. If not, obviously, we'll add them in at the end. So the first recommendations that I've got are 4 in relation to Appendix 1, which is the self-assessment. Members, you were scrutinising whether or not the self-assessment was robust, fair and easy to understand. Out of that, I've got recommendations that going forward, because bearing in mind we don't have to publish this document until October, so we've got some time, to involve the People's Panel and let them ascertain whether they find it clear and easy to understand. We've also got a recommendation to say that somewhere in the document we indicate whether or not the measures are national or local, so that it's clear to see that if they're national we have no choice but to collect them. Local are things that are done within service areas. We talked then in some detail about the formula, whether or not we knew what other authorities were doing, whether it was something that was set out by Welsh Government, which it isn't. And I think the agreement was, but you tell me, that what's currently there perhaps isn't quite adequate, and we would look at 50% being partially successful with 75% as being fully successful. Are you in agreement with that? Yeah. Okay. And then the final one in relation to the self-assessment is that we know as officers that we've used 2% as our within proximity of target, and that it would be useful for members of the public and other audience members to know that, so include it in the commentary so that people are aware. So they are the 4 recommendations in relation to self-assessment. Then we move on to the other 2 appendices. The first one that I've got, I think really can be used across the board, because to get to where we were with the appendices is a 57-page document that covers all of the background information. So that's all of your ambers, all of your greens, all of the good things as well. So not only for Appendix 2 and 3, but across the board, that we try and look at a way to put numbers in as well as percentage figures. So where you're saying that sometimes it's not easy to see what that really means for people, if the numbers are there to, that feed that, it might be more useful. And then I've got another one relating to targets, which again, I think if we're going to do it, we should do it across the board for the background information as well, is that we try and give sight of targets from previous years so that you can see exactly the trend as we've gone along over the years. And the final one there is, I've written down, commentary should be provided to further inform the public to explain about demands on service and aspirational targets. But from what Tom said at a later point is that the document that will be presented in October is a much larger document than what you've seen today, with a lot of commentary. So therefore, within that, there will be commentary to say that, you know, we're under difficult, times and there are demands on the services, etc. But you can put that in as a recommendation to ensure that that does form part of that final document. And I think, from my point of view, that that's all that I've got down as recommendations. Is anyone aware of anything that I might have missed?
One other thing which was just, which in a number of issues, is the issues of funding, particularly where it was grant funded, such as a good example of why the Lift Cody figures were low. The reason why was because the funding didn't come through until late in the day. So that was part of the, so it was one of the reasons why the Lift Cody figures weren't as good, and also other grants and so forth, which were used in previous years and made the figures higher. But now the thing is that those grant figures, those grants have been lost. So as a result, it influences, may influence the performance now.
That's part of the reasoning, isn't it? And that should be part of the commentary, that if there is something which justifies or explains why a particular figure is what it is, then that needs to be in the commentary, and that presumably is what Tom was indicating will be provided. But I think what we ought to do is endorse or agree with what Tom said, which was that there will be further explanation when those figures are published in October or whatever. Yeah. The other thing, sorry, was I don't know, Ray's gone now, but I was hopeful that the demand-led ones, or are you coming on to those? I would like to see the demand-led targets, performance measures, whatever we call them, to be looked at by the appropriate scrutiny committee in due course. No.
I'm on.
I was wondering, could we sort of possibly extend that and possibly have it as consider it being a task and finish group, we're inviting interested councillors to that task and finish group, because otherwise, if you're not part of it, we'll go, I would say that we are going to be losing out, because obviously you've got a significant level of knowledge that would be helpful.
Yeah, we could put it as a recommendation to get in touch with the appropriate councillors for their views. Yeah. Yeah, just finish off then the last.
Yeah, so just to go back, Councillor Davis, to your comment, in the 57-page document that I'm talking about as the background papers, there's every activity and every measure in there. So very often they very much go hand in hand and are linked, and there's commentary rather than numerical figures. So therefore, a lot of that explanation will be provided in the bulk of the report anyway. And Councillor Morby, if I move on to you, I had written down about needing to involve the overview and scrutiny committees. But I've added to that now as well to invite other members of an interest to be involved. The other thing I've put down, and I don't know whether or not you want to consider it as a recommendation, I thought Sue's point about needing to consider service direction rather than target setting in those 16 measures might be quite useful going forward. I completely understand her reasoning as to why targets are not set, but if she is in a position, or that her teams are in positions to actually give a service direction, it might prove quite useful. Obviously, your decision on that, but I did make a note of it.
One of the things that's come out clearly in her seminar, and it's come out here today, is that she obviously is seeing that as quite an important direction in her service, and it came out very clearly in the seminar as well that she sees an extension of the service. And I would take that point completely, and raise the point about developing services. It's something we've got to take on board as well, I think.
Yep, definitely. Is that it? Yeah. Okay, that's all the recommendations we've got. Councillor Parish?
Can I ask, have you including benchmarking at the end of the year so we can compare with other authorities? Was that, a valid point?
We do that as a norm anyway. All of our performance measures for across the council have to be submitted to Welsh Government within a certain date, and then they're published in September, and at that point a comparative exercise is done across all of Wales, not just sort of neighbouring authorities. Yeah.
Local service boards as well. Is that included in there? Maybe that's not. Maybe it's irrelevant.
I don't think that was a recommendation, was it? It was just a comment.
No, observation. Leave it out.
Yeah, okay. Right, everyone else happy? No more recommendations? Okay. Right, that's all that's left is to thank you all for coming. The date for the next meeting is to be confirmed. So that's the end of the meeting. Thank you for attending.